Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Hello APGD, a neighborhood podcast about the Audubon Park Garden District in Orlando, Florida. I'm your host, Michael Lothrop, and today we'll be speaking with Joe Salg of the Corrine Drive Counseling Center, located at 3222 Corrine Drive. You can also visit them online at CorrineDriveCounselingCenter.com. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you'd like to be a sponsor, please feel free to message me on Instagram at HelloAPGDPod. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you in part by Trevor Brown, Audubon Park resident and trusted Central Florida realtor with Fannie Hillman and Associates, proudly serving their clients for over 40 years. For listings, market trends, helpful home buyer and seller tips, email directly to trevor@fanniehillman.com or find him on Instagram at Trevor Brown Realtor. And with me today is Joe Salg, owner, director, and licensed mental health counselor at the Corrine Drive Counseling Center. Welcome, Joseph.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Do you go by Joe or Joseph? I think
Joe is great.
You're a Joe, right?
I'm a Joe.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to start by saying thank you for all of the help that you've provided to the community. I know a few friends who have utilized your services, and they speak very highly of you. That's obviously a great thing to start with, just knowing that that's the reputation that you have out there on the streets.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And kind of researching, you've dedicated your life to helping others. Previous roles include public school guidance counselor, moderating interventions, suicide assessment for juvenile justice system, counseling at the center, hosting group therapy. How did those roles kind of help prepare you for the role that you're in now, being the owner and director of a counseling center?
Good question. And by the way, I appreciate you doing so much research. I'm impressed.
Absolutely.
Well, I always knew that I wanted to do private practice, meaning my own self-employed business where I was helping people, one-on-one or in small groups. When I was younger, I worked in agency settings, and I learned very quickly that that's one way to help people, but it wasn't necessarily the population I felt most comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And I decided that eventually I would kind of just go on my own. And in doing so, I didn't visualize having a counseling center, but it kind of became that over time.
Interesting. So agency being sort of that public school and, different sort of institutions as opposed to the private practice.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people start out in the field doing community-based counseling. So it might be in the school system. It might be going into the homes. There are good resources available for people who need help, who maybe can't always afford that. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for many years, and I realized that it just wasn't the right fit for me. Mm-hmm. I had started working out primarily with young people, lots of kids. Mm-hmm. My supervisor trained me in that, and I enjoyed working with kids. But as I got older, I realized I want to work with couples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like each counselor would have sort of their own specialty, and kind of having those experiences in that background. I mean, we were all kids at one point, so I feel like that may inform some of the practices of going through that therapy process and counseling, but understanding, the specifics that go on with couples therapy, that was where you ended up really, really realizing that is your calling.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a calling as much as I just think it's the thing that works best for me. Okay. And I think that it makes my job more enjoyable. Mm-hmm. So when you think about long-term health and the ability to do a career for 40 plus years, you want to do something you enjoy, ideally. So I enjoy couples. They keep me on my toes. It's dynamic. You never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes it's individuals, sometimes it's couples, sometimes it's thruples. You just never know, what's going to be coming in, and it keeps it exciting.
Yeah. And that is, you say thruples, and it's very interesting because, most people are just familiar with a monogamous relationship, and it's hard to understand that there's not just one way to have a relationship, and that when somebody, may realize that is something that they want in their lives, and that does require some counseling, because it's not the standard. It's not kind of what people are sort of accustomed to, but it's not wrong also. It's not like a rule of relationships that you just have to be with one person. And I think people are starting to finally learn that is not, just a person being selfish and they want other partners rather than just the one partner. And I think it's just so fascinating kind of where we are in this like awakening of all of these different ways of life. And I think it's so important that people kind of understand that and reserve judgment, because everybody has different needs, and that's okay, because that's who they are, right?
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that I work with many couples who would never consider anything outside of what we would consider a traditional monogamous relationship. And that works great for them. And I see plenty of couples who work in that way. The longer I do this, the more I see couples who might want to arrange alternative agreements. Mm-hmm. So I work with a lot of couples who would call their arrangement monogamish.
Okay.
And then, of course, there are open relationships. And so primarily me, and we have one other sex therapist, Leslie Worth, and we're the ones who primarily work with couples who are looking to talk to a professional about, we'll say, non-traditional relationships, kink-friendly. And so we create an opportunity for people to come in and explore and possibly define what those relationships look like.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Some people don't need help doing that, but some do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's hard to, I would imagine, find community in that, because it's such a personal thing. And I mean, just the idea of, how we are raised and how we are so kind of undereducated on sexual needs, and the fact that it is part of our wellness. It's like, I think the puritanical views of sex, it's like people don't want to talk about it, and it's like inappropriate in a lot of circles to have any mention of it, or that it even exists. People are kind of terrified of it. But it is a very personal thing, but also I think that a lot of the fear just comes from the stigma and the way that we are raised, and hopefully we're moving away from that.
Yeah, I think the past few decades have been monumentally different. When I was a teenager, I remember Dr. Ruth would come on, and this little old German lady was talking about masturbation, and I thought,
right.
this is crazy.
It's hard to relate to, right? Yeah.
Where nowadays, that's just so tame.
Yeah,
but I think true. Those people have created a foundation for other people to make other things more mainstream. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So thankfully, we had those trailblazers.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And with the internet, obviously, with all of the information that's available, good and bad, it can be hard to parse through. For somebody just learning these things. I mean, we kind of grew up with a different knowledge set, and it was very limited what we had access to as far as information went. But now, the climate is completely different.
Yeah, I mean, we have so much information. I think sometimes that can be hurtful.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of young people. Occasionally, parents will bring their teens to me. As much as I prefer not to work with that age group any longer, I will make accommodations for, parents who have heard of me locally and trust me. Mm-hmm. And so when they're having some real questions about their kids' orientation or gender identity, they want to talk to somebody who's had a lot of experience with that.
Yeah.
And these kids are coming in with so much information, and it's a concerning aspect of it, because these kids are not only exposed to certain diagnoses, but very educated about that. And they oftentimes come in already pre-diagnosed. They know what they're looking for. Yeah. They've kind of already made up their minds about who they are and what they want. And I'm a little bit more old school. I'm 52. I know you're not as old as I am. Mm-hmm. But when I grew up, I grew up Catholic. And so these were conversations that didn't even exist. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of in the middle. I think it's great that these kids are given the opportunity to explore who they are. But I do think that things are moving so quickly. I'm a little concerned about doctors who are, potentially even doing surgeries on people who are younger than 18. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of work with the trans community. I do refer those clients to doctors who want to help them get on hormone replacement therapy, or do other types of treatments that help them transition. Mm-hmm. So I'm very much about supporting the community. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing so many young people come in with this issue.
Yeah, I can't imagine the level of confusion that young people experience, just sort of given all of the social pressures, all of the, just chemical changes that go on in a person that are just normal and expected. And then if you have something that might be considered atypical that you're navigating, kind of finding the help that you would need, like it would take a very specific, I think, counselor, planning, maybe group therapy, things like that, just kind of finding that, there are a lot of people going through the same thing. And, that I think is one good thing about the internet as far as the information goes, is that people can find community, or at least find somebody that is relatable. Whereas when we were growing up, I feel like our role models were sort of tailor-made for us. They were kind of handed to us.
Sure.
And, but with that sort of brings, like, you can find that role models that are not the healthiest people either, or, just kind of be confused about where you're supposed to be health-wise.
Let me also give you a quick side story. I think this will help you understand kind of where I and some of the counselors are at with this. Mm-hmm. When I was 17, my parents took me to a faith-based therapist, and they wanted me to talk to somebody about being gay. And that did not go well for me.
No.
So I learned very quickly that this was not an acceptable course at that time for me. Mm-hmm. So you learn to censor yourself and or struggle with self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And eventually you work through that. But I decided that I wanted to help people, like you're saying, who are kind of confused and or need support in ways that they don't have that. The field has gotten so much better, and so I'm grateful for that. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of openly gay and or allies who are now working with the community. And that was not the case when I started. Mm-hmm. I started my practice in 1999, and things have changed a lot, but for the better.
That's wonderful to hear. Yeah, you get a sense of that definitely there's a lot of people that are pushing back on these things, especially in Florida, which is just so awful to watch. And, there's a lot of trauma and people being re-traumatized by these people who are supposed to be leaders. And with that, just it comes this entire, like, this experience that society is going through. It's hard to know how to help other than to vote and to, just reach out and know, like, let people know that you care about these issues and that nobody deserves to be treated the way our government is starting to treat people, or maybe not starting to, but being kind of more outward about it. It's kind of terrifying, but I don't want to get too dark. We're here to talk about happy things.
Fair enough.
So you opened the CDCC in 2005. You now have 8 counselors, 4 intern counselors. Is that correct?
I'd have to double check that. Yeah, we have 13 total.
Okay.
Myself included. When I started this, it was just me. Mm. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to do anything more than just my own private business. And then my partner decided that we should create an environment where other counselors could come together and work under one roof. Now, what's interesting is that at Corrine Drive Counseling Center, and we call it CDCC, mm-hmm. None of those people are employees. Everybody's self-employed. So there is safety in numbers, and we have a good reputation in the community as people who have been doing this a long time. And so we get a lot of referrals through word of mouth, family and friends. We don't really advertise. So what that means is everybody is independent, but we all work together and we cross-refer as needed. Now, we don't actually have a psychiatrist on staff, so if someone were to need medication, we would refer out for that. We can coordinate that. But this was a long time coming, and the fruition that it came to was not really what it was meant to be. So when I moved my practice from Seminole County to Orange County, I knew that I wanted to be in this part of town. I really liked the combination of professional and kind of playful part of town. It was very eccentric, and I saw that there was a lot of potential. So there was a professional location where I'm at now at 3222, and I saw that they were advertising, and for about 6 months I would call regularly and tell them I wanted to rent space, but it hadn't been quite renovated. So once the space was ready, I took one office and kind of just worked on my transition from county to county. And then slowly we added counselors. So we grew from 2 to 4 and 8. So we now have 8 rooms and 13 professionals. We're actually right across from East End. And what was interesting is when I first took that space, there was that church.
Right.
And I don't know anything about that church, but I looked across the street and thought that looks kind of depressing.
It was vacant for so many years, and I don't even know how many years it sat dormant, but it was a sad sight.
I was hoping something would come, and I had no idea what it would turn into. So when I heard that they were doing like this concept for a permanent farmers market, I thought, we'll see. Who knew?
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, maybe. And it blew up. And I have to say, it's really done a lot for our little zip code. At the time, there was a lot going on, but it wasn't what it is now. So Audubon Park has become quite the, desirable location.
Absolutely. The destination neighborhood, right? Whereas before, this was sort of like a pass through, right? Like Corrine Drive was like how people from Baldwin Park would get to different parts of Orlando or, Winter Park and that sort of thing. And now people come here to hang out and spend the day, which is amazing.
Well, it's nice when I take a break, I can walk across and get a Gideon's cookie. Or,
yes.
There's things to do here now.
They really are.
So it's been nice to kind of watch the transition. And I don't keep in touch with Jen Marvel, but clearly she gets a lot of credit for now having this crosswalk, which is right in front, or right next to our building. So
that's a game changer. That must have been just stressful watching the cars go by the way that they were and people trying to cross, right? I mean,
I would hear a lot of speeding and screeching, and saw a couple accidents. It was precarious right there. But yeah, people would drive like maniacs. And so it was distracting at times. So I was very glad to see that something's being done.
Yeah, it just feels safer. And as it should, because this is such a welcoming community. And to have these cars zipping by and, you're taking your life in your own hands, just trying to go to East End from here. That's a difficult, there's really no reason for it, right?
Well, it seems to be better. So thanks to everybody who's worked on that. It's definitely made our life a little easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And something that I had noticed on your website as well, kind of I was very interested to learn these insurance kind of pros and cons with therapy. And I was wondering if you'd like to talk about that a little bit, just how sometimes insurance companies can withhold coverage for certain ailments, or, they don't treat confidentiality and consent with employers, civil discovery, different ways that, if you are kind of paying out of pocket rather than going through insurance, you are sort of less protected in a way.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because I had been doing work with the insurance companies for about 20 years. I had been on all the major panels and some of the small ones, and I learned very quickly that it was good for bringing in clients, but there were lots of challenges for the clients as well as for the provider. If someone has insurance, most people should feel relatively confident in using that to seek a mental health counselor. But most insurances do not cover marital therapy or sex therapy. And the biggest concern is that it is always creating a permanent medical record, and that is requiring a mental health diagnosis for this insurance to even cover any of those services. That's all being storehoused, all that information. Our personal notes are not taken, but the insurance company has a right to audit, has a right to determine how many sessions are approved. And I have actually seen problems result as a result of this. So one quick example is I was working with a young person. Many, many years later, he contacted me and was trying to get into the military. And because his treatment was on record, the fact that he had worked with me at age 11 was now preventing him from getting into his first choice, which was the Air Force.
Wow.
And I sent in some paperwork to try to help. And unfortunately, that diagnosis stayed with him. And so now he was not allowed to go into any branch of the military except for one. So he was able to get into the Army. He settled for that. And that really bothered me, knowing that something so cavalier and kind of commonplace could affect somebody's life in a negative way. So I chose to stop using insurance. I don't take it any longer. And I think that if you have no other resource, I think it's a good thing to use. But I always advise or ask clients to use a private pay option, just because you never know when this could come back and potentially cause problems for you.
That's such a long time, statute of limitations for a lot of things that, not that this is a crime, but like 7 years. You said he was 11. So, trying to get into the military, that's a long time. And still they considered what was going on with him at that age to disqualify him. I mean, that's awful.
It was awful for him, and it was awful for me to feel that I had in some way been part of that.
Right.
And that happens, I believe, a lot more than we realize. Once you put this medical diagnosis out there, it is never going away. So if you ever have any question about, how this information is being used or tracked, I would just, plead with the client to not use their insurance, especially for children.
And this is honestly the first time that I've heard about it. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I've benefited from it myself. My wife has as well. Like, it's something that I think a lot more people find it to be commonplace. It's always helpful to get a second opinion on something, just, to talk something out, have a sounding board, somebody who is, a paid professional rather than just your support system. I mean, support systems are important as well, but, that can only go so far when you do need help. I was wondering, are there ways that, cues that people can have to know when they need professional help? And I know that might be a difficult question to answer, but is there some like threshold of like, okay, my support systems are not working, when do I need to go get help?
That's a really good question, and with a very complicated answer.
Sure.
You're right. It just depends on each person. I think that for some people, they just know that they need someone else to talk to. They may not be able to talk to their spouse, or they may have kind of run through the family members and friends. When in doubt, it's a good idea to get an objective third-party perspective. And unfortunately, people in your personal life are not always going to be able to do that.
Right.
It may be well-intended, but it's going to be biased. I think if you go see a licensed therapist, we are trained to be completely objective and to help clients determine what it is that they're looking for. And we can help them figure that out, but we never tell people what to do. So what a client would be looking for as far as a warning sign when they are not functioning the way they used to function. So if their mood is negatively impacting their their personal life, their work life, their health. We see a lot of people who have issues with depression or anxiety, mood disorders like bipolar. So an indication that you really should ask for help is when you know that you're not yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes that can be indicated by, affected performance. So if you're getting in trouble at work, or if your loved ones are complaining, it's probably a good idea just to at least do an intake and just see if there's something that the therapist would advise that the client work on. Mm-hmm. Goal setting is usually a combination of what the client wants to work on and what the therapist would recommend based on what they hear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And I wonder, some people who feel hesitant to seek help and, talk to a therapist, a counselor, what would you say to kind of quell the fears of, they're just going to make me come to them forever, or, they're going to want to change me, or, obviously at some point, we're constantly changing, we're constantly growing. But what would you say to somebody who was resistant to the idea of going to a therapist?
I think the best response would just be to normalize the fact that so many people have some bias about that. Mm-hmm. We've always been told that you have to be a little crazy to go get help.
Right.
And some cultures feel more strongly about that than others. Mm-hmm. It's changed a lot. But, therapy started out with, you would see your therapist like Dr. Freud several times a week for years, maybe your whole life. Mm-hmm. That's changed many, many times over. And now a lot of therapists do what's called solution focused. We're just trying to get people in and out of therapy as quickly as possible. We know that they just want to feel better. They want to do better. They don't want to necessarily be doing this long term. They may not have the money for that, or the patience or the energy. Mm-hmm. So many people can, be feeling better or doing better within a few months. Every case is different, but I would generally say that the best answer would just be to talk to somebody on the phone, get a sense as to how they are. Mm-hmm. If you feel comfortable with them, just make an intake appointment and think of it as a meet and greet or a job interview. You may hire that therapist, you may not. You should just feel comfortable. And if you feel comfortable, you'll be surprised how much work you can get done.
That's such great advice. Yeah, because that was going to be another one of my questions, is just how do you know that your therapist is a good fit for you? Because everybody has a different style, and that kind of interview process, because I think a lot of people are just like, okay, I want a solution, so I'm going to call this person and go see them, and they don't really consider their options, right?
Yeah, it's challenging. There's a lot of therapists out there, a lot of different types of therapists. Mm-hmm. I think the first question goes back to what you had said about the insurance. Are you needing to use insurance? That's the first question. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Secondly, what is it you want to work on? And I recommend that anybody who's even thinking about counseling could go to psychologytoday.com, and they have a search engine. And you just click on Find a Therapist. Mm-hmm. You type in your zip code. And then you can search by insurance company and or issue. And so you can type in things like marital or LGBT or abuse or substance abuse. And that will narrow your search. Typically, I would recommend a client maybe interview 2 to 3 counselors before you decide on one. Mm-hmm. I did that when I was in therapy, and you just get a real quick sense as who you're going to be able to open up to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it's interesting, all of the terms that you do see on the internet, even though people might be self-diagnosing incorrectly, just sort of understanding what different like toxic behaviors can be, even toxic positivity as a concept. And is it neutric personalities, a nurturing, understanding, trustworthy type of person, and how that is the type of person that you want in your life, to kind of seek out those people that make you feel energized, rather than kind of those that are sapping your energy every time you hang out with them.
Sure. The research shows that as long as you feel comfortable with your therapist, it doesn't matter the gender, the age, the training, the modality. You just want to have somebody who you feel is listening and caring. I've heard some horror stories from clients who said, my therapist was on their phone, or I had one client say the therapist fell asleep.
Wow.
And, clearly that's a problem.
My goodness. What kind of signal is that sending? That is
very
terrible.
sad.
Wow.
So the therapist should make you feel at ease. And if you don't, then you should move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And those things to us, I mean, just speaking them out loud, they seem very obvious, but yeah, once you get in that room, you don't really know who that person is until you start talking to them. You can get a few sessions in before you kind of realize that it's not a good fit. And then, you shouldn't feel awkward about having to move on, because you're paying them to help. And I think those are obvious instances where people are, that is not the place for them to be.
Sure. Yeah, and there's always the possibility that you work with the client for a while and they say, okay, I think I've kind of gotten as far as I can go with this. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they want to try a different style.
Sure.
Sometimes I'll be working with a client at the office and I realize that this person has a real history of trauma, and I'm not trained in that. So I refer them to a trauma therapist. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we share clients where, I may be working with them on relationship issues, and then Emily might be working with them on trauma. And not everybody believes in having more than one therapist, but I think that the more the merrier.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense too. Absolutely. So are there other services at the CDCC that we haven't talked about that are provided or available?
That's a great question. I think that if I'm just going to present to, the community what we do, it's pretty vast. It's individual therapy, relationship therapy, family counseling, and sex therapy. And we have a variety of specialists in different areas. So my specialty, for example, would be relationships, LGBT, and sex therapy. I have other therapists who specialize in mood disorders, trauma, kiddos in need, and we have people who do career exploration. So, if anybody's ever questioning, hey, who would I talk to and how do I make that happen? Just feel free to call me, and I can help put them in contact with who I think would be the best fit. So when in doubt, just call the director, whether it's Corrine Drive Counseling Center or any center, and say, I'm a little lost. Can you help me find the right person?
Absolutely. And everybody in your practice does have at least a master's degree and at least 2 years of experience, correct? According to your website.
Correct.
If that's updated.
That is. So the way that works is, and a lot of people don't understand, and nor could they understand, the different levels of training. So for you to be considered a mental health counselor or therapist, you have to have a minimum of a master's degree. And then to be licensed, you have to go through the process of doing at least 2 years of hours. Excuse me. And then you have to pass a test. And so it's quite a process. Most people would never understand or maybe even participate in this process if they knew how laborious and long-term it was. But it's actually really good because clients are very well protected in this way. We don't have anybody on staff presently who has their doctorate, other than maybe Dr. Josh. I think his doctorate is in education. So a master's level clinician is where you start. If you want to go for additional training, you can get your doctorate, and that's sometimes a PhD. A psychiatrist is in a completely different field. They are not in the field of psychology. They are medical doctors. So when you think of a psychiatrist, think of somebody you're just going to for medication. They're not working on your details. They're not spending hours with you going through the nitty gritty of your life. They're there just to give you the medication. So you always want to start with a counselor and then maybe work your way up to a psychiatrist. Some people, really don't need medication.
Right, right. And it can be hard to determine that sometimes. And there's not a clear threshold for when that is. But it can be extremely helpful when it is necessary.
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely a medication advocate. So a lot of times I'll be the first person to say, hey, we've been working on this, and I don't think you're doing as good as I'd like to see you do. I think that maybe we need to consult with a psychiatrist for the possibility of medication. And of course, if a client is not interested, then we don't consider that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it can be a little scary because it's changing chemicals and that sort of thing, but these things are well tested and a lot of them have been around for decades, and that's always good to know. The stress level that you experience in this job, what are some things that you kind of do to center yourself and to kind of maintain that even keel so that you can do this in the long term?
I think that just comes with practice. When I was younger, you do tend to think of your clients after they leave. You do tend to worry. And the longer I do this, the better I've gotten at just kind of understanding that there's nothing we can do. We work really hard for 1 hour. And if there's going to be a problem, then I assume that I'll hear about it.
Yeah.
They can either reach out to me in crisis. But I have learned to really set good limits with that.
Having boundaries, healthy boundaries.
Absolutely.
It's hard when you're an empath, and you have to have a lot of empathy for this job, I would imagine.
You do. I think it can be harder for certain personality types to draw that line. I'm not your typical warm, fuzzy therapist, so I think it's a little bit easier for me to leave it at the door. So I would say self-care is really important because this is exhausting work for the client and the therapist. I make sure that I always take 2 days off a week. I used to see many clients a day, and now I see no more than 5.
Good.
You just kind of learn where your comfortable spot is. I do recommend, taking breaks, lots of travel. There's so many things people can do for self-care, but if you don't do that, then you will suffer. The job has a lot of, we'll say, occupational hazards. You hear a lot of trauma, and you see people and you see people suffer some horrible things. And it starts to kind of mess you up sometimes. So you really have to not let that contaminate your well-being.
Right. Because you are taking ownership of a situation to an extent, but you can never take full ownership because it's the patient who is actually in control of their outcomes, and you can only kind of provide some guidance and another way of looking at things. I mean, the interesting thing about therapy is just it's a different way of thinking about thinking. I had heard that at some point, and that just like really resonated with me.
It's perfect.
Right?
Yeah, I think not only is it about thinking differently about thinking, it's about helping clients identify their own resources. So you don't want the client dependent on therapy. That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of people miss that distinction too, right?
Sure, they think that that's healthy, and it's not. So, it's a case-by-case basis, but you really help the client on understanding that therapy is an aid. It's just one of the many tools that they can use.
Yeah. And I think, humans are messy, and we go through so much in a lifetime. Just getting to a point where you accept that growth and loss and change are just part of life, and to not be afraid of those things, that, you should embrace all of the experiences that kind of like, are normal, right? And react to them as such. And then the things that are not normal, reacting to those accordingly as well, and responsibly. Yes.
Absolutely. And I'm just sitting here thinking, you sound like you'd be a great therapist.
Thank you. I have been told that. I'm very fascinated by it, and I feel a kinship as well. I've been a good support system to friends in the past, and I'm always available to do that, but I also tell them, like, you should talk to somebody professional as well. Sure. My availability and ability to help is limited because I'm not a trained professional, but I have learned a lot over the years, and I pay attention to those things.
Well, you're a great listener and you're
Thank
a
you.
great communicator. You know, we all need people in our lives, professional or otherwise, to support us and help us. But I think that there comes a point where maybe they don't rely on their friend. They don't want to burn out their connections and understand that, okay, I've really kind of overtalked this at this point.
Right.
Let me go to somebody who's not involved in this.
I have made that mistake actually recently with a very close friend, that I was there too much, and I realized how unhealthy it was for myself. And I had never experienced that before, but I really had to, let that person know we need to take a break from this friendship, because I don't know how to just be your friend. And I feel like your problems are my problems and your outcomes are my responsibility. And I know that that's not healthy and it's not true. And I've gotten, I take full responsibility for the role that I've played in this. And I don't know how to fix it without just taking a break and really kind of resetting our friendship.
Yeah, well, good for you. I mean, not everybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to know that that may not only be, unhealthy for you, but it might be unhealthy for your friend.
Right.
We don't want people to rely on the friends or the therapist for stuff that they should be doing on their own.
That's the codependency is a theme. And yeah, it's something that the people pleasing is a theme in my life, and all of that, I feel like I'm doing the work to recover from those things and acknowledge them along the way before they become, pressing issues like this was. And I think that that's just something that comes with time. You're just sort of like, okay, I've gone sort of the wrong direction with this. And even though my intentions were good, I realize I'm not really helping this person out because they do depend on me. And it's tough because, when it's somebody that you love and care about and, a dear friend for many years, you want to do what's good for them. And a lot of people might choose, well, just being in their life is going to be better than, them not having me in their life. And you have to make that call sometimes. It's tough.
It's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm proud of you for acknowledging that this is something that was not working.
Mm-hmm.
When in doubt, just say, hey, I know a good counseling center I can send you to. I'm not your therapist. This has gotten really messy.
Mm-hmm.
And when in doubt, to say, I'm just not trained to help you with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you had posted on your Facebook or somebody from the center an Irish expression, sadness is on me, rather than saying I am sad. So as not to identify oneself as being that thing, but it's a thing that's on you temporarily. I thought that was very beautiful.
Yeah, that's well said. That reminds me of something I talk to my clients about a lot, which is that we are not our actions. So, good people can do really bad things, but that doesn't make you a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sometimes takes practice, is to let go of who we believe ourselves to be.
Absolutely. And in this kind of, narrative of cancel culture and the fact that that is a term, it's like really what should have happened at some point is accountability. And nobody really gets canceled because, unless their life ends, they're going to be around, they're going to be interacting and navigating how to, help that person learn or guide them to somebody who can help them to learn from their misgivings, their mistakes, and them acknowledging and apologizing for those things. You hear of all these high profile famous people, I think I read about 2 musicians today that, people came out with accusations about sexual misconduct, and, the lessons really need to be learned. And I think the foundations were not there for people to communicate expectations and understand what that means to do that, and to really take ownership for their actions, especially when they are in a position of power like that, and they're, a famous musician or, in some other context where they can take advantage of people and they don't realize that they're doing it, or they claim to not realize, but that's absolutely what's happening.
Relationships are tricky. And so sometimes it is our job to help people see how they're potentially negatively impacting others. Clients don't always see that.
Sure.
They may not be able to. So with practice and with time, and with the right delivery, people might begin to see that they've made these mistakes in relationships.
Well, I wanted to also talk about your involvement with Cyndi Lauper as you've met her several times, and your efforts to get her into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, that's my side gig. It's a lot of fun.
I like it.
Keeps me out of trouble. It's very light and kind of easy compared to work. So when I was a kid, I kind of looked up to this person who made it okay to be different and quirky. And, she was an outcast, and that's how I felt. So I thought this was great. She's somebody who can be a role model for misfits. And so, I followed her my whole life, and I actually have the biggest collection of memorabilia in the world. So I actually have the Cyndi Lauper Museum. And, I keep it open for people who want to come see it. It's kind of memorable for people who love the 80s.
Where is that located?
So that's actually what's actually in Colonialtown North.
Okay. All right.
And it takes up the majority of our home.
Wow.
We can't afford a professional space, but
sure.
We have everything from, her wardrobe to her bra to, you can't imagine how much vinyl. So if you're a fan, just, give me a shout and I'll give you a free tour. Cyndi has talked about coming to see it one day. We occasionally get pieces retired from her, and I'm more than happy to house it and bring fans over and educate them about her career. And so I'm definitely pushing to get her into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It has to be a fan-based grassroots campaign. So I do that in my free time.
That's excellent. And how can people connect with you to schedule a visit to the museum?
Thanks for asking that. Anytime anybody has any reason to contact me for Cyndi reasons and or for counseling reasons, let me give you my phone number.
Okay.
It's 407-716-7207. The websites would be CorrineDriveCounselingCenter.com. And then, of course, CyndiLauperMuseum.com.
Excellent. Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure. And is there anything else that you would like to talk about before we?
I just want to say, I really, in all the years I've been here now, 17 years in this community.
Sure.
I don't always get out and meet people. I'm busy working with people very privately, but I do see all the hard work that goes into Audubon Park, and I just think it has a lot to offer. I'm proud to be a part of it. We have everything from high-end design to kitschy vintage, coffee. And what is this now about this new Michelin star restaurant we have?
Yes, absolutely.
Have you been?
I have. I've been for lunch. That would be Cadence.
Okay.
So they were located in East End originally, and they were called Capo.
Oh, yeah.
So they had, sort of a similar setup, but they also had kind of a Japanese convenience store set up later on in their operation there. So they had moved, and yes, they got recognized with a Michelin star, which is just incredible and well deserved. I mean, what they're doing is so top notch. I mean, they've studied all over the world, and what they bring to the culinary scene in Orlando is astounding.
I would love to go. It's probably going to take a while to get a reservation now, right?
It would now, yes, but I think they do lunch and dinner, so you might be able to get in for one of those. And then the neighbors, they also have kind of that chef's table set up for dinner there.
Okay.
And that chef is opening up shop in Baldwin Park soon. So yeah, there's the food scene here in Audubon Park has it's sort of been the heart center of Orlando's culinary scene.
Sure.
And, obviously from the theme parks, there's great restaurants there and great chefs there, but, now some of them are moving out and staying in Orlando, which is super cool.
I love being in the dessert district. Is that what we're calling that?
I think we should, yeah.
It's not good for my weight, but I have to say
it's tricky,
it's
right?
Convenient.
It is. It is. And we need to treat ourselves like that. There's a balance, obviously.
There you go. It's self-care.
It is self-care, and it's, it's made so well, and there's no garbage in it. It might be like a little rich, but
Sure.
like that's what you want, right?
Absolutely.
When you need a treat.
Lots of treats around here.
So many.
And let me definitely give a shout out to my favorite primary care doctor, Dr. Weaver.
Ah, yes.
Do you know him?
I have been to Dr. Weaver. Yeah,
I like this guy.
They're great. He and his wife both.
Yeah, so we send a lot of our clients over there. I haven't met Dr. Albers, but they're very, he's very nice.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for being such a good fit in the community, because I think that support goes such a huge way, like such a huge distance to keeping the momentum going and, being that anchor and bringing people in. And, I think it's just so important for people to know that you are there and you're there to help. And, especially after the pandemic and what that kind of did to everybody's brain, being removed from community for long periods of time. I think that was just trauma on a global scale. And we're still kind of dealing with, the changes that has brought about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that has been a very challenging time, and it continues to be for so many clients. It's created a lot of relationship challenges.
Right.
So we're there if you need us. I mean, I've been there since now 2005. We're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Excellent.
So, if anybody has any needs, give me a shout and I'll put you in touch with the right person.
Well, Joe, thank you again for taking the time, and thank you for everything that you do. And we'll talk to you soon.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye. Hello APGD, a neighborhood podcast, is brought to you in part by Stardust Video and Coffee, Audubon Park's beloved neighborhood cafe, bakery, bar, and meeting place, located at 1842 East Winter Park Road. We are also sponsored by Red Light Beer Parlor and Brewery. Founded in 2005, Red Light is widely known as the source for world-class imports and microbrews, a wide selection of natural wines, plus award-winning beers brewed in-house. A full kitchen is in the works with an amazing menu by Chef Jess Tantalo, so stay tuned for that. Located at 2810 Corrine Drive, please check out Red Light for all things beer and wine, and soon food. Our theme song is by Christopher Pierce, and special thanks goes to Trey Hester and for all of his help in making this podcast a reality. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, please click subscribe and leave a review if you'd like. We'll see you next time.